Damit wir zügig mit den Arbeiten beginnen können.
Hello and welcome to 7 Days in Europe. 7 days the people of Cyprus, and indeed anyone with savings in a Eurozone bank, are unlikely to forget. One large Cyprus bank is to close, and uninsured depositors, many of them from Russia, stand to lose a fortune. With me in the studio is German ALDE member Wolf Klintz, and in a moment we shall be discussing the crisis. But first, it's a yes-no sequence in which I shall ask a series of questions to which I'd like you to answer just yes or no. Has the Cyprus crisis damaged the euro?
To some extent, yes.
Does this show we need a banking union more?
Yes.
Would one have saved the Cypriot banks?
With the banking union? Well, I guess yes.
Are you concerned that recent events have stirred up anti-German feelings in Cyprus, Greece and so on?
Unfortunately, you're right.
Has the Eurogroup handled this latest one well?
No, not ideally.
Joran Dijsselbloem says that this could be a model for future bailouts. Is he right?
I think in substance he may well be right, but the way he has communicated is poor.
The markets were rattled. The euro dropped 0.8% in value overnight. Is that worrying?
Not really. Could have dropped more.
Can public confidence in the euro be restored?
Yes, I think so.
Should depositors in Italy, Spain and Ireland perhaps be worried?
No.
Can anti-EU feeling in the countries affected be overcome?
I hope so.
And are citizens right to blame the EU?
No.
Okay, well, there we go. That's the end of our yes/no sequence. We're going to be looking at the main stories of the week, the main news stories of the week. But of course, obviously, the first one is the Cyprus banking sector. I mean, what do you feel? What are the lessons that we've learned from that initially?
Well, I think the lessons that we've learned are twofold. One, a banking sector should not really be out of proportion compared to the GDP of a country. And second, the business model of a banking sector, particularly when it is big, has to be sound and sustainable.
But having said that, you said that the banking sector shouldn't be bigger than the economy, but it's 8 times the size of the GDP of Cyprus. The banks in Luxembourg are 24 times the size.
Yeah, but they have a different business model, and that is much more sustainable, so that makes the difference.
OK, there's much more to say on that, I know, but first our look at this week's news with Caroline Grasso.
Chypre sauvé de la faillite, mais à quel prix? Au lendemain de l'accord destiné à sauver Chypre de la banqueroute, réaction mitigée des groupes politiques du Parlement. Si tous saluent le fait que les dépôts inférieurs à 100 000 € aient été épargnés, la manière dont a été gérée la crise est mise en cause. Pour le président du Parlement, Martin Schulz, il est plus que jamais urgent de réaliser l'union bancaire en Europe. Que faire des vieux navires en fin de vie? Mardi, les députés de la commission environnement ont adopté de nouvelles règles pour mieux encadrer le recyclage des anciens bateaux. Trop souvent, ceux-ci sont démontés hors de l'Union européenne dans des pays en voie de développement. Le démantèlement échappe la plupart du temps au contrôle de sécurité et de salubrité. Objectif, recycler davantage en Europe en respectant les travailleurs et l'environnement. Quel avenir pour l'aide alimentaire en Europe? Lundi, les députés de la Commission agriculture ont dit oui à une nouvelle enveloppe pour l'aide aux plus démunis pour la période 2014-2020. 2,5 milliards d'euros pour 7 ans, c'est moins que les années précédentes, mais c'est davantage que la proposition initiale de la Commission européenne. Les négociations continuent entre le Parlement et les États membres, la suite en Commission emploi.
You're watching 7 Days in Europe. Wolf Klintz, do you feel that the Cyprus deal that's been done has changed the way we're going to handle countries in trouble in future?
Well, I hope that we learn the lessons and realize that it's not just the substance of the decision that we take, but also the way we communicate. Because after the first round of negotiations, when they had reached an agreement which was not acceptable, as we know, because small savers would have had to participate in footing the bill, the communication process was really a catastrophe. And it led to unrest and uncertainty and lack and loss of confidence in other countries. And that, of course, should have been avoided. So I think we have, in the future, we have to think of all the possible and potential consequences also on the Union as a whole and on other countries when we do negotiate. Now, in substance, I think what has come out now in the second round of negotiations is not that surprising, namely that the shareholders are being called upon. Second, those that own bonds are being called upon. And thirdly, those that own more than €100,000, because the deposit guarantee schemes that we've agreed upon in Europe do protect savers up to 100,000. So it's clear that those that are above 100,000 are not being protected 100%.
But Mr. Dijsselbloem came in for a lot of stick from the Economic Affairs Committee when he appeared before it. But he made the point to me afterwards, saying that taking a haircut of the smaller depositors was not an interference with the deposit guarantee scheme, because it was a different type of taking money.
But I think he's a politician. I do know that he's been a finance minister of the Netherlands only since November 1 and head of the Eurogroup since the beginning of this year. But nonetheless, he should have known that the normal, ordinary citizens would not be able to see the difference between a special one-time levy and losing part of the savings below 100,000. And therefore, this was badly handled, in my opinion. I'm not saying that Dijsselbloem himself or alone is to blame. In fact, the whole group is to blame, including, and in particular, of course, the Cypriots, because they have come forward with that proposal. But everybody that finally agreed to that proposal should have known better.
I was at Frankfurt last week at the ECB, and there was a conference on the post-trade settlement system that they're introducing. And there, even people from the central security depositories, the big players in the financial market, were saying this was a really bad deal and a bad idea.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. It was a bad idea, and it was badly communicated, and therefore unnecessarily. It led to a lot of problems elsewhere. And you know, you asked the question before, should savers in other countries, Italy, Portugal, Spain, etc., be worried? I think they should not be worried, because the deposit guarantee scheme is working. And there's no idea whatsoever to change that. So up to 100,000, everybody's savings are safe and protected. But they have reason to be worried after that incident.
Look, in Germany, there is now an anti-Euro party that's been formed and is campaigning for votes. How concerning is that?
I don't think it is very, very much concerning. It's the alternative for Germany, as it's being called. And they are not necessarily they are neither anti-Euro nor anti-Europe. They are anti-Euro in the current sense. What they are saying is that the common currency, the Euro, is too strong for some countries. And they are right when they say so, for instance, for Cyprus, that for Cyprus the currency is just too strong. They are not competitive at the current strength level of the currency. So what they are saying is the southern countries, you know, from Portugal right to Cyprus, they should have their own southern euro, and the central and northern countries should have what they call the northern euro. And the two may start at the same parity now, and probably five or 10 years from now, the southern country, the southern euro will probably be worth only 85 cents of the northern, or even 80 or 75 of the northern euro. Now, in theory, this is a good idea, I think, because it reflects economic realities. But politically, this would be a disastrous message.
There are stories coming out in America that the lawyers in Cyprus are being contacted by lawyers in Malta, Liechtenstein and Luxembourg, trying to persuade them to move capital out of Cyprus. So what's going on there? Because it shouldn't be possible, should it?
Well, everybody can talk to everybody else in Europe. We have a free society. But if that were right, and I haven't heard it, but if that were right, I think it would be appalling, really, because it would show that some member states and you know, professionals in these member states try to exploit the misery and the difficulties of another member state in a rather poor manner. And I think that is the least that we want to have. We want to stand together. We do not want to divide each other. And so if that were the case, I think it should not be tolerated.
Very, very briefly, if Cyprus is to recover, its economy is to recover, obviously tourism and banking are its main industries. It looks as if the banking industry has been destroyed.
Well, it's been certainly reduced heavily to a level that maybe can be sustained over the years. Now, I think Cyprus, based on tourism alone, and a very small, probably still fragile banking sector, would have a hard time to survive. But thank God they do have also reserves, oil and gas, that has been detected. So I think the European Union should support Cyprus very much and on short term to really exploit those resources.
OK, Wolf Klintz, thank you very much indeed. I'm afraid we have run out of time, although I suspect this is a subject that we may well be revisiting in the months ahead. Goodbye for now, and thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hi, Jim.
Take a seat. You're watching 7 Days in Europe. According to the World Health Organization, 20 to 30,000 people a year in the EU die from diseases related to asbestosis, and that number may rise. Now the European Parliament has overwhelmingly adopted a report to deal with the problem, written by my studio guest, British socialist Stephen Hughes. We'll be discussing the issue, but first our yes-no sequence, in which I ask a series of questions to which I'd like you to answer just yes or no.
Okay.
Have working people been made to bear too much of the burden in the economic crisis?
Yes.
Will ordinary savers feel worried after the Cyprus bailout?
Yes.
It looks more hopeful now that food aid, at least to the poorest, is going to continue. Is that a relief?
Yes.
Are you concerned that in 2013 Europe still needs soup kitchens?
Absolutely, yes.
That is making itself unpopular, isn't it, with ordinary people?
Yes.
Can that be put right?
Perhaps.
That doesn't sound convincing. Are we likely to be exposed to asbestos for many more years to come?
Yes.
Is there more about than people actually realise?
Yes.
Is there less danger now that we've realised how dangerous it is, at least?
No.
Is it going to be very expensive to get rid of?
Yes.
In the current crisis, are you worried about the rise of fringe parties?
Yes.
Could the EU be derailed by Beppe Grillo or by Golden Dawn in Greece?
No.
Would it help if EU decisions were more transparent?
Yes.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed for taking part in that. We now have a short report on the asbestos question, but just before that, whatever action the EU takes, asbestos is going to be going on damaging health for some time to come, isn't it? How dangerous is it?
Extremely dangerous. We have millions of tons of it still locked up in the walls, floors, ceilings of our homes, churches, community centres, and there is no safe level of exposure to asbestos. One fibre can eventually kill you 30, 40 years later. It's a long latency period.
And it's not, people say, oh, white asbestos isn't as dangerous as blue or brown.
They're all dangerous. All three types are dangerous. There is no safe level of exposure to white asbestos either.
OK, well, let's take a look now at this short report on the asbestos issue by Paul Anderson.
A graveyard in Belgium for Europe's rusting toxic tubs. Seen another way, in this age of recycling, it's a birthplace of sound economic and ecological sense. Usable steel from old boats is big business. First, though, dismantlers have to remove a lurking danger, asbestos.
The first protection is to the environment. When we are working, taking away the asbestos, that the fibers are not going out of the vessel. And then the second protection is the individual protection of the workmen.
In a village near the Belgian city of Mons, an asbestos death count is taking place. A black dot for every person who worked with the material and died from an asbestos-related disease. The task is managed by Eric Jonker, co-chairman of the main Victims Association.
Ça me touche de voir que dans les drames humains, il y a des gens qui osent se lever et qui osent dire non, même à des grands directeurs d'entreprise et à des grands capitaines d'entreprise.
The men here came into contact with asbestos when they worked at a now-closed factory of the construction materials company Eternit.
Je trouve que le gouvernement belge est responsable aussi. Parce qu'il n'y a pas que dans les usines d'amiante, dans les écoles, on a mis de l'amiante, tout ça, il y a eu des problèmes aussi. Mais eux, ils savaient.
Mr. Jonker lost his mother, father, who was an engineer at Eternit, and two brothers to mesothelioma. His mother, Françoise, launched a claim through the courts.
For the first time in Belgian legal history, a court established the liability of Eternit, saying you were, for decades, you know exactly what was going on, you know the danger of what you were doing.
The HQ of Eternit Belgium. It and associated companies employ around 1,000 people. It's coming to terms with the medical, social and business consequences of asbestos.
We have a past and we want to tackle the past. And that's the reason also we made a program and that we said, okay, it's not only about recognition of victims, it's broader than that. It's also about supporting the community where we can.
The European Parliament wants a series of measures looking at the prospects for abolishing all existing asbestos and getting just recompense for its victims. Governments have taken their eye off the asbestos file, MEPs argue, and it's time now to put the lid finally on a modern-day scourge.
Steve Hughes, that's a fairly horrific story, but it's not untypical, is it? Especially in the old industrial areas of Europe, including your own and my own original place, the northeast of England.
Absolutely. Many hundreds of thousands of workers were exposed to asbestos, particularly in the shipbuilding industry in regions like mine in the northeast of England. But it's a problem everywhere. In churches, schools, hospitals, community centres, the asbestos is still there. In wall panels, ceiling panels, a lot of it sealed safely away until it needs to be exposed for maintenance or refurbishment work, or indeed demolition and removal.
Now, you want, in your report, you want the asbestos to be gradually removed, well, not all that gradually, quite quickly removed from everywhere where it is exposed. But that is a process that's going to take time, because particularly in the economic climate, obviously there's a cost involved. Companies that have buildings with asbestos are more likely to want to hide it than to get it out. It's dangerous to move.
It is. And there is a body of opinion that says it's best left where it is until it needs to be removed. And I fully understand that argument. However, we are, for example, embarking upon a huge programme of improving the energy efficiency of all of our public buildings within the European Union and indeed private homes. Why not use that opportunity, if we can identify where the asbestos is, to safely catalogue it, remove it and dispose of it? We set a deadline of 2028. Poland has set a deadline of 2032 to make itself totally asbestos-free. The Australian Parliament has just introduced a new bill to remove all asbestos in Australia. So this is a movement that's beginning to gain traction.
But there is asbestos to be found. For instance, there are still mines, open mines. There are uncovered, buried asbestos. There's fly tipping, and the risk of fly tipping, especially if some contractors are not very scrupulous in their removal of the stuff.
Yeah. We make the point in the report actually that the landfill disposal of asbestos is no longer a safe option. We have to try to destroy it once it is removed. We have to also clamp down to make sure that existing licensing and disposal regulations are properly applied across the European Union. I worry particularly about small one-person outfits that might think, oh, well, you know, it's a bit of a bother to apply all of these regulations. Let's just get rid of it as quickly as we can. The dangers are very, very real. 20, 30, 40 years from now, it can lead to death from mesothelioma or a range of other asbestos-related diseases.
No, the WHO says that it talks about this 20 to 30,000 deaths a year, and we haven't reached a peak yet. Why is that?
Because we're still coming across it, and the latency period for asbestos is very long. If you breathe in fibres today, they can lie dormant in your system for up to 40 years. It can take up to 40 years for mesothelioma to develop. Once it does develop, we know it was caused by asbestos, it's not caused by anything else, and it's incurable.
I mean, there are lots of actual illnesses. I mean, mesothelioma you mentioned, but there's also obviously asbestosis. Yeah. But in fact, it's not just carcinogen. It is deadly in all sorts of ways.
It is. I mean, pleural plaque is a major cause of death as well. So yes, there are many ailments associated with it. Another point we make in the report is that we need to try to improve the recognition of asbestos-related diseases across the European Union and compensation for diseases related to asbestos.
How do you destroy it, though? By definition, you can't burn it, you can't bury it. What do you do with it?
It's got to be defragmented. You have to totally demolish it down to basic molecules to make it safe. Once you stop it being in fibrous form, the danger is removed. It's the fibres that are the problem. As long as it remains in a fibrous form, those fibres can effectively burrow into your lung lining and pleural lining, and that's where the problem begins.
Now, your report calls for more screening and more information for the workers who have to work with it, more special training even for architects and engineers who have to work with it. And that's going to take a while to implement, isn't it?
It is, and it requires resources, but I think it's an urgent problem. If we look at a cold, harsh cost-benefit analysis of all of this, the costs of not acting now are huge, absolutely enormous in the medium to long term. So it's worth making that investment now.
How important was the 2012 Turin judgment in which a former owner and a former director of a company were made to pay damages for 3,000 deaths, I think it was?
Crucially important, and we're seeing similar judgments across the world. I mean, it's not insignificant that a number of the former major manufacturers and producers of asbestos in the United States filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy a decade ago. They tried to hide from their responsibilities. I'm pleased to see in your film that this Belgian company are owning up to their past responsibilities. A lot are trying to hide from them. The courts are stopping that.
OK, Stephen, I'm afraid we've run out of time there. It looks like we're going to be living with the legacy of asbestos for quite a long time yet. My thanks to Stephen Hughes and, of course, to you for watching. Goodbye.